Well, I promised you, and I am going to produce it. He is back. Dave Hatter from Intrust IT here in Cincinnati. We are talking about AI in companies, in the business. And last week we talked a little bit about some of the big things that we're starting to see happen, the voice cloning and the fake messages and things like that. But today I really want him to narrow down and talk about what does a policy actually look like. And this actually came from a question from Lisa, one of my clients who I was with the other day, and she said, Pandy, do you have a template? And the crazy thing is, the more that Dave and I started talking, we realized it's not a template. You really need to take a real hard look at what your company does, what the needs of your company are, what are the needs of your clients, and then take a stance. Dave, jump in here. A stance on how you want to use AI in your operations.
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for having me back on, Pandy. And I agree wholeheartedly with that. I mean, every business is unique. Some businesses have a much higher risk tolerance than others. And some businesses, their risk profile is a lot different. If you're dealing with military secrets, right, your risk is a lot greater than if you're like the local car repair shop. So, while I agree with you wholeheartedly, because these tools are already out there, the genie's out of the bottle, they're not going away. Anyone can go to something like ChatGPT, or if they're on Microsoft 365, use Copilot for free, right? Or at least to some limited extent. So you may have employees in your business, no matter what you do, already using these tools. And as an owner or an executive in the business, you need to understand, while there is a real upside to this, there's also a significant downside. Could your employees be putting trade secrets in? Could they be putting, information that would be covered under some sort of compliance law like HIPAA or something in there without realizing that is exposed through the large language model to other people? So I think it's really important that businesses get out in front of this, partially with education and training, and also a written policy that dictates what's acceptable within your organization. And again, what's acceptable for a military contractor with top secret information versus like the local bakery, probably a wide variance there. But the good news is you don't have to start from scratch. There are a lot of templates you can get, or even use one of these tools to create a template for you, and then work back to what makes sense for you in terms of your risk appetite.
It was interesting as I was trying to do some research. It even threw the caution, if you're using AI on machinery or any kind of operations, you've got to be concerned about the safety issues.
Well, yeah, so at Intrust, we're using AI in a variety of different ways internally for automation and productivity type purposes. Like, for example, if someone sends in a ticket via email, rather than have a human being read that and figure out like, okay, it's this type of ticket and it should go to this team and it's this level of priority. We've got almost 30 years of data that we've trained these models on. They're not connected to the internet. They're exclusive to Intrust. And it can, in many cases, figure out, okay, this is this person at this company. They have this problem. That problem's been solved before. It goes to this team. So the triaging and the dispatching piece is handled to a large extent by AI. So it doesn't mean anyone got laid off or fired. It just means they could be repurposed to higher value tasks and let the machine do some of that. Mm-hmm. It's not perfect, but it does get better over time. So that's an example of the upside. But if you applied that in a situation where there was, let's say, some sort of machine or robot or something moving around, could that go straight? Because, I did software engineering for like 25 years. Do you know how many bugs I personally created in software, Pandy?
Oh, my gosh.
And none of those were ever on purpose, So, yeah, again, this stuff is all in its infancy. You cannot trust it wholeheartedly. If you do, you're setting yourself up for disaster, and people need to be thinking, again, what is acceptable in my business? How can I memorialize that in some sort of policy? And then do some training so people can understand either don't use it at all or use it but within these guardrails so that you don't ultimately end up in some sort of catastrophic situation.
I also saw somewhere where it said that individuals really need to think about the ethical aspects of this.
Well, yeah, I agree, because first off, every one of these models, there's the big ethical implications, and there are several lawsuits out there because most of these have been trained on content they scraped off the internet. So I've taken your copyrighted content, put it into my large language model, and now I'm charging people money to get, content, video, audio, whatever, out of these tools based on information I essentially stole from you, right?
Yeah.
So that's one argument of it. Then you've got the whole, okay, is the training data biased? Are the algorithms biased? So yeah, again, this stuff is still in its infancy. And I think, a lot of the hype has worn off. For a while, everyone was going to lose their job because of this stuff. And, I don't think anything like that is coming in the near future based on where we are today. Yeah. I also don't know what's in some lab somewhere either. I only know what I personally have access to out there. But yeah, there are a lot of ethical considerations for this. And there's a lot of like under the hood type of implications of, okay, let's say I'm going to use one of these tools to try to make a determination about should I hire someone? Or would they be a good renter? Or whatever, right? Again, these things make mistakes. There's this whole hallucination component, which is well documented in the business, where they just literally make stuff up. And in many cases, if you question, will argue that, oh, no, that's absolutely true. Oh, yeah, that's true. So, yeah, people really need to understand while there is an upside to this, there's also a downside, and you've got to figure out what makes sense for your business. And then again, have a policy that says these are the acceptable uses of this, and these are the tools that are acceptable in our organization.
And remember, listeners and viewers, you can be very specific saying that this department is permitted to use AI in this fashion. That department over there has to do it in an entirely different way. Maybe HR doesn't get to use it at all because of all the employment implications and the possible bias and discrimination issues. So you don't have to treat the entire company the same.
Yeah, I agree. And I would definitely encourage every business, again, from a risk management standpoint, forget the technology aspects, anything that would potentially have legal consequences, if you're, contracts, anything that is going to be produced by this that could potentially have some legal consequence down the road, at a minimum, should be thoroughly vetted by someone that has, detailed understanding of that domain. And if it's a contract or something, reviewed by an attorney, because, you can have some sort of sample contract spit out in seconds from one of these things. Is it good? Would it stand up in court? Does it protect your interest? Hard to say. I wouldn't trust it. I can tell you that. There's not a chance I would trust that.
Well, and let's go back to what I've taught you over the last 2 years. Even non-competes are so diverse across the country. You cannot take that kind of a contract and just have Chat GTP or whatever the stuff is. They cannot create that for you because each of those states have a different requirement, and you have to be very specific. If you have remote workers, you have to be cognizant and holding them to their state laws, not where you are currently with your corporate office.
Well, you make a really good point because, when you learn more about these tools, right, prompt engineering is the art and science of asking for what you want and then over time learning how to do that in a more efficient and effective way. Generally, the more context you give a prompt, right? I want a non-NDA for Ohio for this kind of thing, right? The more specific you are, the more likely you're going to get a better result. But again, because of hallucination and or possibly biased data these things were trained on, even if you say, I want a non-compete for Ohio, it may give you something that is incorrect. And without some expertise and an attorney to vet it, you are possibly setting yourself up for, a non-optimal outcome at best and possible disaster at worst.
Trouble.
Yes, trouble. Trouble is a good way to describe it. Yes, trouble.
I had a severance agreement sent to me the other day by someone, and she said, hey, could you just look this over? I created this, and I want to see if everything is okay. And holy crap, it was missing the review period and the ability to revoke. It was missing. It just had I had about 6 elements of a proper severance agreement that this was missing, and I couldn't help but think, oh, she just did a chat GTP.
Absolutely a possibility. And my advice to people is if you're going to use these tools and you have no knowledge about what you're asking for, you're setting yourself up for trouble. Gosh. I can't tell you I don't use these because I understand the limitations. I understand the hallucination. Yeah. I don't ask about things I don't know anything about. Yeah. And, where it's helpful is in many cases you can get something that's going to be 60 to 80% of what you need and go from there, as opposed to I'm looking at a white screen in Word and a flashing cursor and I've got to do everything myself. But if you don't understand these limitations and you don't understand what's acceptable both from a legal standpoint and within your organization, yes, you are headed for trouble as an individual and possibly for your organization.
And if you're listening to the show, most likely you are a leader and your company is depending on you to make good decisions. Please listen to what he's saying. But now we need to put together a policy so that we can make sure that everybody else understands.
Yeah, and I'm not saying don't use it. I'm just saying if you're going to use it, understand, the pros and cons, what it's good at, what it's not good at, where the pitfalls are, and, what's going to be acceptable to your leadership team, and then, work within that to define a policy and have some training, right? Don't just throw a policy out there and hope everyone follows it. Yeah. And I think most people, too, once you explain this to them, they can kind of understand the risks and, will work within the guidelines. But so often, because these tools are free and I can just go do a search, I'm just in there doing stuff, right? Yeah. So the good news is there are numerous policy templates out there from a variety of different organizations. I found an article, just doing a little research for this beforehand, where they, in addition to providing a whole lot of advice, like it should have this section and this section, it should talk about things like, ethics and bias and risk management. But, and probably most importantly in my mind, these are the tools. This is the list of AI tools you're allowed to use. And to your point, it doesn't have to be, enterprise-wide and comprehensive for the whole organization. It could be, okay, the finance team can use these tools and the HR team can use those tools, or to your earlier point, HR team can't use any of these things, right? So, again, you got to base this on your specific business and what makes sense for you. But there are well-documented examples out there like Salesforce. You can look up what they're doing. I mean, that's obviously a very large organization, and they may, view it differently than your local mom and pop would. Wired. You don't have to start from scratch is the good thing. You can find examples and then look at it and say, okay, this section makes sense, but what it says does not make sense for our organization. Maybe it's too permissive or it's too restrictive or whatever else. But you don't have to start from scratch. You could always use a tool like Grok or ChatGPT or something and say, okay, give me a template. But I would, again, strongly encourage folks to be very careful about that, and you'd be better off to find a sample template from an organization, again, like Salesforce, for example. Look at what they've done. I can guarantee that's been vetted by their attorneys, and use that as a template as opposed to you start from scratch or rely on things that might be less good from a legal standpoint.
From an HR perspective, please be very cautious and establish something in there to limit your management team from making I'll just go ahead and say it, causing dismissal or terminations based on any AI at all. I'm just thinking about individuals using AI for reports or emails, and then somebody being held accountable for not, doing exactly the standards of the company. Well, but you let him use it. So no, he's not using his own brain or what you think you're paying for.
I think you're making a good point there, because there would be people who would sit in this chair and argue against what I'm going to say next, which is, oh, yeah, these things are much better than people and they can do all of this stuff. And in some ways they are, but they're notoriously bad at math, or have been up to this point. And again, if you don't have any sort of knowledge about what you're asking for and you just dump some data in there, you run the risk of that data being incorporated into their large language model and exposed elsewhere, so that you've got a privacy and
so there's another part that needs to be in the policy right there.
Absolutely.
Just to define what data can be used in there.
Yeah, like you don't want trade secrets, for example, being put into the free version exposed to the public of ChatGPT or any of these things, because now your trade secrets are out there and they can show up for someone else. So you definitely need to define, like if it's not available to the general public, you definitely should not be putting it into any of these internet-connected models, because it could show up anywhere.
How about surveillance? That's a part of data. If is there any way that they could connect AI to cameras or to emails being sent?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, because it's just data, right? So yes, could you take some sort of data from your cameras? Now, a lot of AI doesn't work that well with something like a video feed, but could you take some kind of logs or something from your system and plug them in there? And then that would potentially give bad guys who have access to that the information they need to hack your system. Yeah, absolutely. That's why it really is important to think about, from an organizational standpoint, what am I going to allow to go into these public models? It's another thing if you have these disconnected systems, like I mentioned, we use at InTrust for this stuff. But if you're just allowing people to dump anything they want into something that's publicly available, that is not a good good plan for your company. And these are the kind of things that need to be discussed. That's why if you get one of these sample templates from someone like a Salesforce, they're a tech company first off.
Yeah.
Secondarily, again, I'm sure their attorneys have vetted whatever they came up with.
Yeah.
You can kind of get some guidance like, okay, here's what they're doing. Again, it might not be a fit for you, but at least it's a starting point, and it'll cover all the main things you need to think about.
Well, and I'm also thinking, I think the policy should have something in there that there's regular or consistent audits.
I agree with that too.
To make sure that something hasn't gone awry.
Well, and also because this technology changes rapidly. So, let's say company A merges with company B and their privacy policy is totally different. So maybe you're using company A's platform today. You've read their privacy policy. You understand what that means for your business and your data.
Yeah.
They get acquired by someone else, or they go out of business and are bought by someone else. And now this thing here is totally different. And what was acceptable to you before isn't now. So, ideally, every policy in my mind related to technology should be reviewed at least once a year simply because things change so fast. I get that's probably a high bar for a lot of small companies.
Yeah.
But, anything where you're going to have your data going out into the ether there, you're exposing your organization to some pretty significant risk. You ought to look at it at least yearly, maybe more, because this space is changing super fast,
Let me ask you about this, and we haven't talked about this, so I'm blindsiding him here.
It's all right.
So he's going to be okay. There's so much integration in HR between payroll systems and benefits programs and COBRA and TPAs of all sorts. Can AI transfer from one system to another because of those integrations?
It can, yeah. But, usually you would use an API, an application programming interface. So, could you have data coming out of your payroll system going into one of these AI models, or some internal system that's pulling data from other systems and then dumping that? And absolutely. You could also have an employee who doesn't understand the risk trying to produce some sort of report for their boss or something and extracting that data out, dumping it into one of these things. And now suddenly, like, the CEO's salary is showing up in someone's report from ChatGPT or something. I know that sounds far-fetched to people, but I mean, that's a possibility.
We're living in a time of the pandemic. Be careful. No, I'm thinking of Social Security numbers. I'm thinking about health information.
Any kind of PII like that, you should not be putting into these publicly exposed models, because you can't know when it's going to serve that up to someone else as part of its content that it generates. So, it's a lot to, unfortunately, it's just one more thing people have to think about. But it's important to get out in front of this now, to your earlier point, because people are going to use this stuff.
Yes,
especially
they already
if you don't
are.
Tell them not to use it.
They're already using it.
And they probably don't fully understand some of these consequences we're talking about here.
Yeah, if I can get paid $50 an hour and spend 30 seconds doing something that used to take me an hour, I'm going to do it.
Well, yeah.
I got other things I'd rather do with the other 57 minutes or whatever.
or you could, multiply that 50 times many,
Well, exactly.
Right, yeah.
And with our remote workers, we're already questioning what they're doing.
Yep.
We're already concerned whether we're getting the productivity out of them as we should. Is there any last bit of advice or
Yeah, I guess the last thing I would throw out there, Pandy, is getting back to voice cloning. I know we talked about that pretty extensively last time. I just can't emphasize enough to people, this is a real threat. You can go watch the interview I did with John Matarese where we cloned his voice. We cloned your voice right before the last show.
Yeah.
A tell for that would be if you are in a conversation and there's a weird latency to it, it's possibly because scammers are literally typing in what they want the computer to say in someone's voice.
Real time.
Yeah, real time. Your son, your granddaughter, your CEO, whomever. So if you're having a conversation with someone and there's a weird pause before they answer every time, it's entirely possible that they are literally making a response in their mind, typing in what they want to say in this person's voice and hitting a button, just like we did with your voice in the last segment, to respond to that person. So again, there's no way to know for sure that you're dealing with a voice clone. And as they get better and better, I think it's going to be even more difficult to tell. But again, if you find yourself in a conversation and there's this weird pause between your response and their response, that is a strong tell that something is out of whack there and you are possibly getting scammed by a voice clone.
Stop right there.
Crazy, isn't it?
I'm going to go back to, again, another running theme that we have here on the show, and that's training. If this has not giving you the message that you need to be training your management team, your supervisors, even your employees, your just basic staff on the dangers and the limitations and what your position as a company is on this topic. Please start. It's the new year. Start now. Get together and decide. And Dave is always available.
Yep.
He's so easy to find. Google him. He's all over the
You
place.
won't have any trouble finding me
He's
now. And I'm
all
happy
over
to
the
help.
place. Well, and again, we've talked about some of the big scams that have occurred, and you don't want that for anyone.
No, I mean, I want every organization to be successful, right? That's good for our region. It's good for that organization. It's good for the individuals that work there.
Yeah.
And sadly, cyber attacks are rampant. People are going out of business as a result of these things. And this AI and the voice cloning in particular is just one new facet. And the thing that really concerns me the most is I don't think most people even realize it's a thing at this point. And it's already happening out there. So
change is here, guys. And if you or your team need an actual policy from an HR perspective on how to deal with AI, please let me know. We have one here, and you can contact the studio or you can contact me directly. But we're here to help you. You know that. And again, thank you to Lisa for bringing up this question. If you have something you'd like to hear, please let us know. That's what we do here.
thanks, Pandy. Happy New Year.
Come back and listen to us again at The Human Resource.